We're now halfway through the mid-season and things are really starting to heat up. Now there's a lot of comic book parallels and scenes taken from the source material, so with that, let's jump right into it. Now it goes without saying that this is going to contain a lot of spoilers for the 4th episode of the season 10, and possibly some spoilers for the rest of the season. Also, if you're not up to the Whisperer War in the comics, it will definitely have spoilers. You've been warned. Before we get into it, do me a favor, would ya? Hit that subscribe button. If you're feeling generous, you can put some digital coin into my virtual hat by visiting my Patreon page. In the least, share this video as it helps validate me and gives me the feels. This week's episode focuses on 3 different scenarios: Ezekiel dealing with his depression, what happened at Hilltop, and everything that revolved around Lydia. Now, the bulk of the material is going to come from the last scenario, so we'll briefly cover the first 2. We see Ezekiel get out of bed, woken up by a crashing tree at Hilltop. Now remember that tree, because it's going to come up again later. The next time we see Ezekiel is on a road spotted by Michonne. She follows him down to a deck overlooking a creek where he looks like he's about to jump. He's clearly dealing with a lot of stuff and is contemplating just ending it all with the whole losing Carol and losing the kingdom and losing Henry. He's going through a lot of stuff, and Michonne kinda helps him out of it. They embrace in a hug that ends in a passionate kiss. Now, at this point in the comics, Ezekiel's dead. He was one of Alpha's victims. In fact, he was the biggest named victim that Alpha put on her pikes. However, this whole scenario with Ezekiel is a nod to earlier issues before the fair. Shortly after the death of Glenn, Jesus takes Rick and his group to meet Ezekiel, same as they did in the show. However, instead of the king falling in love with Carol, it was Michonne he charmed. Their interactions happened very similar to how he wooed Carol and eventually ended up together, only briefly though. Sometime after the war with the Saviors and before the fair, Michonne takes off, similar to how Carol did in the show. But when she comes back, she wants nothing to do with Ezekiel, but makes it more obvious than Carol did. Next up is the Hilltop. A huge tree falls down and crashes into a barn, injuring several people. See, remember that tree? I told you it would come up again. They manage to rescue everyone before a horde of walkers gets in there. But the tree damaged the outer wall and eventually walkers push through. Fighting all throughout the night, they manage to take out the walkers with no casualties. The Hilltop also gets attacked by a walker horde in the comics, but under much different circumstances. After the Whisperer War has begun, Beta sends a small army to attack the Hilltop as a diversion and try to rescue Lydia. The Army of Dead also has Whisperers mixed in, mostly as archers in the back, but also made their way into the Hilltop once the gate fell. Just like in the show, they were defeated. Also, let's just say Lydia isn't too keen on the idea of going back to her former fam. Now, it's still unknown in the show if the tree falling down was an accident or was intentionally knocked over by one of Alpha's groups.
What? Do you think it was them?
It was them? Of course it was.
Now, this intentional attack could still happen in the second half, since the Hilltop burning down was a crucial loss for them in the Whisperer War in the comics. So I'm sure AMC will also have Daryl's group take a big hit to make it not seem so one-sided. Also taken from the comics is Magma and Yumiko's romance, though it sparks up much later on.
Looks like things are getting too spicy for the pepper.
During the next story arc, as the group is heading to the Commonwealth, it's shown that the two have a secret romance. Okay, so this last scenario is where the bulk of the material from the comics was used. In Alexandria, Aaron is training new recruits to fight the Whisperers.
You're dead. Your eyes are on the ground.
Some of the younger ones and some of the former highwaymen feel the need to taunt and pick on Lydia. Taking the advice of Negan, she tries to get back at them by grossing them out. It doesn't go so well, as later on that night they jump her and start beating the ever-living hell out of her. Things aren't looking too well until Negan shows up out of nowhere and saves her, accidentally killing one in the process. After a firm talk with Daryl, the council holds a discussion as to what to do with him. The community wants to put him down, but the council is split. The next morning, when Gabriel goes to check on him, it's discovered he has escaped. Alrighty, so there's a lot to unpack here, so I'm going to do my best to go over it all. We start off first with Aaron training the new recruits. This was inspired by Dwight in the comics. After Rick forms his militia, he puts Dwight in charge of training them, though they practice with guns, military formation, and on walkers. Most of what went down in Alexandria was focused around Lydia, from the other kids taunting her to nearly killing her, and to Daryl saying they need to keep her safe. In the comics, there's no interactions with Negan though. That relationship was exclusive to AMC, but Carl is still alive in the comics, and he's there for every step. She doesn't get taunted or teased or anything, but after Alpha creates her border, Eugene of all people proposes using Lydia as leverage against her mother. Rick finds out from Michonne that he's rallied others to his idea, and they're planning on taking her by force from Rick. He gets Andrea and Carl to leave in the middle of the night with her to go to Hilltop for safety. Now, part of taunting Lydia was the whole spray painting Silence the Whisperers on the doors and on the sidewalks. Now, this was directly adapted from the comics, but with a much different purpose. It's Rick who has the slogan put up, not to taunt Lydia, but to remind people every day that the Whisperers are still out there. He wants to keep them angry at that group and away from himself, though there are some objections to the propaganda, especially after it begins to instill paranoia in others. At some point later in the show, Lydia is jumped by those that were taunting her earlier and nearly killed. It's not until Negan shows up and saves her, but accidentally kills Margot in the process. So this scene was kinda patched together from two separate events in the comics. First, just after the Whisperers were discovered, Carl is sitting down talking with Sophia when Brandon and another attack him from behind. They're angry at Carl from an earlier altercation and want to teach him a lesson. As he runs off, they turn their attention onto Sophia and beat the living hell out of her, saying they'll lie and tell everyone the pair attacked them.
Whoa.
Hey, we're the ones who were attacked here.
Carl returns with a shovel and nearly kills one of them. The second part is when Rick is attacked himself by a couple of angry Alexandrians. Vincent and Morgan, angry over what the Whisperers have done, take their anger out on Rick. Vincent thought they were only going to scare him, but Morton has other ideas. This attack in the comics also ends in the death, but by the hands or mouth of Rick. The last piece of this scenario is the whole Negan escaping from his cell. This concept was directly adapted from the comics and is setting up for something really big. If you'd like to know more about what that is and potentially the rest of the season, I urge you to check out my other video, What is the Fate of Alpha? So the previews from next week's episode, it makes it seem like Brandon is the one who let Negan out. Now in the comics, it's also Brandon who lets him out, but for a much different reason. He's angry at the Whisperers for killing his mom, but more angry at Rick for killing his dad. Hearing about how much Negan hates Rick, he figures he'd be a willing guy to take him to the Whisperers so he can inform them of Rick's plan. He wants to see the two groups wipe each other out, but knows he can't get to the Whisperers on his own. Well, there you have it. AMC finally got the majority of the build-up out of the way, and we're in for one hell of a ride for the next 4 episodes. I can guarantee you that there's going to be some really big shocks and surprises near the mid-season finale. Let me know your thoughts and comments in the section below, and until next time,